Professor Michael Chege, and many others. We had about 10 professors who researched on elections and election-related issues in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and other parts of the world. So I had a fair grasp of comparative analysis of challenges of elections and so on, that we were able to unravel issues that affect elections in Africa that make elections prone to manipulation. So we had a very, very long list of tamper-prone elections. Those are elections that are easily manipulated. They are tamper-prone. Then you also learned about tamper-proof elections, or elections that are tamper-proof, meaning that it's not easy to manipulate them. And this boiled down to systems on how these elections are managed. It boiled down to funding. It boiled down to the political culture of some of these countries and so on. And I'm glad to report here that colleagues who attended that training of 4 months with me, that fellowship in Ghana, Dr. Isidore is part of the election process in Ghana, and even South Africa, Bantuan is also part of the election commission there. We had a very, very good time in terms of following up these, and I've written about 6 articles on elections in Kenya, elections in Africa, and so on. I've also supervised PhD students and master students examining the issues of election, especially issues revolving around the post-election violence in Kenya in 2007. So having said that, I proceeded to America again at the University of Illinois for my PhD under Fulbright scholarship. Fulbright is an American government-owned scholarship program that augmented my PhD training, because PhD training is very expensive in America. Very rarely do people manage it without scholarship. I had received a government scholarship in Kenya for my master's degree, but for PhD, I had to go under the Fulbright scholarship. I spent years at the University of Illinois getting my PhD in history, and from there proceeded to Central Ocean University, where I was an assistant professor and director of African Studies. During that time in the US, I participated in many election monitoring activities, especially as affiliate of the university. The Central Ocean University, where I was director of African Studies, is a government university, a state university. So I did participate through political science affiliation in various activities such as voter education, civic education, and so on, as part of the university process and so on. I returned to Kenya in 2010 to Catholic University of Eastern Africa, where I was made director of research. And as director of research, I have attended to many issues related to elections, political activities, issues about leadership, governance, and so on. I led the research docket at Catholic University for 3 years. After the 3 years of my tour of duty, I applied for DVC position, and I was appointed Deputy Vice Chancellor at Case University, where I participated in matters of leadership that are relevant for this position. So that after my tenure at Catholic University on research, I now went into full administration in terms of management of human resource issues, management of financial issues, management of student affairs, as well as outreach, reaching out to community and even donor funding for various projects of the university. From Kish University, I proceeded to Kenya University as Vice Chancellor and finished my term at Kenya University. And right now, I am at Tikal University of Kenya as a professor in social sciences. But I would point out, Chair, that during my period as a researcher, as a manager, as an administrator, I've learned that to manage an organization and help your input in an organization such as IEBC, it requires concerted effort of teamwork. It requires concerted effort of bringing in experiences from wide spheres of experience that the commissioners have come from, as well as Secretariat. I'm aware of the need to educate ourselves in terms of making elections fair and free, to make them tamper-proof and not tamper-prone. If you make them tamper-proof, it means that you are putting systems in place that will hinder manipulation, that will hinder structural and institutional manipulation. And if you make them tamper-proof, you've got to put concise structures and institutions that will make that possible. One of which is what we have seen across the world that is working very well, is a dual electoral system where there's the electronic or digital voting backed up by the physical voting on the ballot paper and so on. So that there's electronic or digital ballot paper as well as the physical ballot paper, that in case one fails, you can always go back to the other. Plus, of course, the technologization, we are seeing technology moving rapidly, and one hopes, and I hope that I live to see this, when elections can become electronically done, so as to avoid a lot of what we see in terms of baggage of funding processes, chances of manipulation, and so on. I also want to point out that to afford amicable electioneering process, it requires financial management that is efficient, that is efficacious, that will allow for all stakeholders to participate and be satisfied. Then the issue of confidence building that I was able to capture in my training on elections at the University of Florida for that fall semester was that there is need to capture as many stakeholders as possible and satisfy their interests, because perception is a very, very important aspect in elections, as well as media and all other critical or strategic stakeholders. Chairperson, can I rest my case at this point there?
Yes, you may. Professor, please confirm if you are a registered voter.
Yes, I'm a registered voter and I have my voter's card here with me.
Okay, where did you last vote?
At Yukumu Primary School in the Mwea constituency, Viga County.
Thank you so much, Prof. I'll now request Mr. Morris Kimuli to ask you a few questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. Professor.
Yes, sir.
You pronounce your name as Morris or Maurice?
Both are doable. My mother says Morris, but educated people like you say Maurice. Both are acceptable.
You know, I'm also, when I was baptized, I was also called Morris.
Yes.
But I was named after the great American evangelist, Morris Cerullo. What was your inspiration? It's a good name.
I think my father picked a name of an officer who was in the prisons department. He was his boss, I think, at prisons department those days. And he liked the officer and he picked that name. But over time, the name has evolved, because in primary school, I wrote as M-O-R-R-I-S. But when I went to high school, I was told that the proper spelling is M-A, but I can see you have Morris.
Yes, the American way.
Yes.
The American way.
The American way, correct, yeah.
Thank you. We have looked at your papers and you are quite comprehensive CV. I think it goes to around 65 pages. And I note that you are a professor of history.
Yes, yes, sir.
And so what I propose to do is to take you through the journey we have taken in Kenya and to somehow juxtapose that with our current scenarios. I'll just ask you a few questions. So from our history, sir.
Yes.
We had a constitution in 1963.
Right.
Was it a multi-party or a single-party constitution?
The 1963 constitution that served us up to 66 was actually multi-party. That's why you had Kanu and Kadu participating. But somewhere along the line, this was, I think, tampered with in terms of political experience to the point that now Kadu remained the dominant factor in the parliament.
So it was a multi-party.
It was multi-party, yes.
It allowed multi-partyism.
Yes.
And sometime in 1969, we had our first multi-party elections.
Yes.
In 1976, what happened is that the constitution was amended to give the president powers.
Yes.
To pardon people who were found guilty of electoral malpractices.
Right.
If you look at our constitution, and there were demonstrations, and people like George and were arrested, you know that.
Right.
I know this is home ground for you.
Yes.
But if you look at our constitution today,
yes,
does the president have the power to pardon people who engage in electoral malpractices?
Thank you for that question, sir, because it's a very profound question that informs our journey, democratic journey, from the history to the present. The current constitutional dispensation does not provide for a pardon for political malpractice, but rather it can come through what we call the presidential annual pardoning. One can be allowed to practice under that, but under the current Electoral Act and so on, the president does not have that power. And this is due to the 2010 constitution that took away that authority and the power of the president to pardon, because in the past we saw many, especially those close to the presidential circles, get pardoned on many occasions when they infringed or broke the electoral laws and rules and so on.
But for the record,
yes,
the president can actually pardon,
but through other channels, especially through the annual clemency that he does
through the
prisoners.
The power of mercy advisory committee,
yes.
And Article 133 of the Constitution.
Exactly, through mercy power, exactly, yeah.
Now, in 1982, after the attempted coup, what happened with respect to multipartism, single-partism, and so on and so forth?
There was a realization by the then President Daniel Arap Moi that he needed to consolidate power. There was what he think is inner circle in Kano and the ruling party and government, that there was need to consolidate power, especially given the disruption that 92 caused. So this led to a snap election that was called in 1983, which actually led to the many cabinet ministers losing their positions during that election. And the formation of the cabinet that was formed had actually over half were new faces in the cabinet. And this election, 83 and 88, have been regarded by many electoral analysts as those that did not actually play according to the rules of the game of engagement and so on.
So was it multi-party or was it a unitary?
It was single party.
It was single party in 1982.
It was single party because by 1982 is when the Section 2A was actually inserted in the Constitution to create a Kano as a
Section 2A was inserted in 1982, you are right.
Yes.
What would you say about the Mulolongo system? When was it implemented?
It was used in the 1988 elections, and many analysts, if you look at many of the analytical pieces, scholarly, judicial, and so on, we had the highest number of petitions. Then at the same time, there was clear manipulation of the electoral system.
There was a clear manipulation of the electoral system.
Yes.
Now, that was the Mulolongo system of voting. Is the Mulolongo system of voting applicable under our current constitution?
It's not, sir, because if you look at the Electoral Act, and even if you look at the Electoral Act, we have put in the Constitution the secret ballot is the preferred mode of election. It is covered in one of the sections in the Constitution.
And the voting system ought to be simple,
clear, secure, precise. It's actually fair.
And that, in your view, then vitiates the Mulolongo system of voting.
Yes, because the Mulolongo system was clearly subject to manipulation.
Section 2A was introduced in 1982.
Yes.
When was it repealed?
It was repealed in 1992 when we had the first multi-party elections.
Is it 92 or 91?
Actually, the process for repeal starts in 91, and it's 92 that we get multipartism. So I agree with you, it's 91 that's repealed, and then 92 is when we first get back the multipartism coming back to.
So since 1991, December, when Moi introduced, the repeal, initiated the repeal of Section 2A.
Yes.
Has Kenya ever gone back to one-party system?
I would say no, because what happened in 1992.
No, I get the answer.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
So under our current constitution.
Yes.
How would you say multipartism is anchored?
It's entrenched in our constitution. I think Article 4. I think
Article 4.
Yeah, it points out that Kenya shall be a multi-party state.
You are right. Now, in 1997. There was a clamor for wider participation within the political process.
Yes.
And we had the IPPG reforms.
Yes.
Briefly, what was the content of the IPPG reforms and how were those concerns in 1997, how are those concerns taken care of in our current constitution?
That's a very profound question. Mr. Kimoli, let me try, because IPPU was introduced as a negotiating platform to address those already serving the electoral body who had been actually handpicked by the president and those around him. So the IPPG negotiation was to neutralize the dominant factor of those nominees who had been handpicked to the electoral body. So it was supposed to neutralize that particular force and so on. And what is important is that the political parties were involved in the selection of those who now joined the handpicked individuals in that body. If you compare that and this time, is that I'm here because of that current reform in the 2010 Constitution, because at that time, political parties did their own interviews, did their own selections. We don't know what factors they were looking at, if they were using a point system, if they went through psychometric, we don't know. So this is a much improved system of selection of people to commissioners to IBC, because it's more transparent, it's more open, and everybody's witnessing what's taking place, and they can gauge performance in terms of the individuals who are coming before you. And I want to point out that there's a far much more transformed, almost 360-degree turn from 1997 to 2021 today.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask you one question, because we can see the red light. If you are a public officer and you decide to run for election, you are required to step down from office.
Yes.
What are the timelines applicable?
The IBC has put up actually a timeline for the current public officers and given them that by May 2022 they should have left office. So the timelines in the constitutional factor, I think, is 6 months before an election. A public officer should resign so as to engage in elections. But I want to point out that there are exceptions in the Elections Act, that serving president, deputy president, members of parliament are exempt from that rule in terms
and members of the county assembly.
And members of county assembly.
That was exempted in 2017 after the High Court decided that they are exempted.
Yes.
What about if you want to run in a by-election? Within what time should you step down?
By-election, the period is shorter, and I think it should be either 7 days or 21 days, but it's much shorter than in a regular election.
Within 7 days from the declaration of a vacancy?
Yes, of the vacancy, yes.
Thank you very much, sir, and all the best. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bwana Kimoli. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kimoli. I will now request Dr. Abdallah to ask you a few questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Professor.
Yes, sir.
In your CV, among your professional experience, you are the ED, Executive Director at the Center for Democracy Research and Development. This is CED RED, Nairobi.
Yes.
Please tell this panel as to what this organization is all about and what impact it has had on the Kenyans.
Yes, the CEDRED does a lot of development activities working with the marginalized groups in society, youth, women, people with disabilities, and so on. And as an organization, we empower people in terms of their rights to education, their rights to creation of enterprises, and so on, in order to participate in the country's development effectively. We've partnered with various organizations to ensure that youth and people living with disabilities, as well as women, are empowered in order to participate in the democratic process and development. What we do is that we help organizations that are nascent or that are young to write proposals for them. We aid them in terms of training to improve their capacity to become self-reliant in financial stability and so on. We also engage in many activities of publishing, especially of young scholars who want to research on matters of democracy, development, and so forth. We also undertake research training for various organizations, government entities, to improve the outputs, especially in terms of baseline surveys and other research outputs. We also participate in terms of providing popular education to individuals, especially areas that have high levels of illiteracy. We partner with the Association of World Education to provide literacy programs to villages where people sign with their fingers we want to make them sign with their hands and so on, their fingers and so on, than just putting their thumb. So these are various activities that we have participated in under SIGNET. And yes.
So, Professor, thank you for that. So, in other words, as much as you are empowering them, also you are creating independency and leadership.
Correct, right? Dr. Abdallah, I agree, yes.
Good. So it is believed that continuity comes by developing structures,
yes,
yeah, the institutions and process.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And good leadership takes attention away from personalities and, idealism.
Yes.
Right? And place it on value and controls.
Yes.
Are we in agreement on that statement?
Yes, we are.
Good. So, Professor, if you become a commissioner of IEBC using your qualification and in agreement with this statement which I've just given you,
yes,
how can you, because you realize, and I'm sure you know, the commissioners, they come in as green.
Yes.
There's no continuity.
Yes.
And however, if you let the tree grow, it grows up, but you need the roots to hold it.
Yes.
Which seems to be missing. What's your opinion on that, and how can that be put in place with your experience?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdallah, for this profound question, because it actually is at the center, at the very core basis of organizational stability. And your question has 4 parts: the structures, processes, leadership, as well as personalities. And I want to point out that IEBC, for example, if I was to be appointed a commissioner, the structures are there. They're in existence. I've seen almost 9 operational directorates that are concerned with voter education, concerned with HR, financial issues, so the departments are there. But what is important is to make, and agree with you, these structures operational. For example, IEBC's clamor for funding from the exchequer could be augmented by creating a fundraising space within one of the departments to engage in fundraising. I've worked in organizations like Central University, where I was director. We had an office within the university for fundraising, and every section of the university had a fundraising officer.
Which university was that?
Central Washington University. Central Washington University.
Washington?
Washington University in the US.
Okay.
I worked there for 6 years as director for African Studies. So the fundraising component allows you to go out to stakeholders, such as donors and so on in this country, embassies, various organizations that can actually chip in, assist, especially in the electoral process, without compromising the quality of the elections and the outcome of the election. Then the other issue mentioned in the structure is that there must be capacity building for commissioners, capacity building for a secretariat, so that everybody goes through training periodically. At Central Washington University, where I worked for 6 years, every year we are trained on one aspect or the other about fundraising. We'll spend 2 weeks out of campus as management of the university, on just training on fundraising. And we went to Melinda Gates Foundation, we went to Rockefeller, went to Oprah Winfrey, all organizations, philanthropists, and so on. So IEBC requires that. I went through the IEBC structure. I didn't see a segment at IEBC that is in charge of just fundraising or resource mobilization. Actually, organizations call it resource mobilization, others call it fundraising. So there are different names, but I didn't see that in the IEBC structure. Then the other issue is to make sure that there's a harmonious relationship between the commissioners and the secretariat. We have seen in the press in the past, we live in this country, there have been tensions between the commissioners and the secretariat. These tensions can be harmonized through regular team building activities. They can be organized in a manner that allows stakeholders to come together, and that the team building within the commission can actually elevate the structural problems and so on. Then the process. Processes don't begin in one day and end in one day. Processes take a long time. So there's need for institutional education on processes. What process needs what input? There must be a process and input and output. That every process must have an input and output. And these outputs and the inputs must be tamper-proof and not tamper-prone, so that these processes are not interfered with by other individuals who come in to manipulate. So you must create processes that are tamper-proof, to the point that if it's a procurement, for example, there are no manipulative elements that are coming in to gain from the procurement structures and so on. If it's training, it's fair, training program that to make sure everybody is masters in strategic management, that everybody has a chance to go for that training and not to serve the interests of a few through favoritism and so on. So it must be a fair structure made for these particular processes. If it's training, if it's capacity building, if it's remuneration, if it's appraisal of staff for promotions, must be done in a manner that is very transparent and open. Then leadership is very, very important. Leaders must lead by example. If it's going to the office on time, if it's leaving office in time, if it's participating in activities, they must lead they must talk the walk and walk the talk than just talking. They should not preach a wine. They must not preach a water and drink wine, so to speak. And then the personalities. We know that organizations sometimes have those personality elements emerging. They emerge to the point that they begin to point out that this is a Mrengo of Fulani and this commissioner in Mrengo of Fulani. We see those in all organizations. But there must be a structure within which the commissioners and the secretariat can work to harmoniously work together without creating those divisions among them. Dr. Abdallah. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Professor, not in all organizations, in many organizations.
Many organizations.
Thank you. Now, how do you be talking about this tamper-proof and tamper-pro? What's this? I really didn't follow that.
The course that I took at the University of Florida in 1994 was a specialized course for potential election observers, monitors, and so on governance issues in Africa. And one of the professors who was very, very profound in terms of experience on elections pointed out that for an election to be effective, it must create structures that are tamper-proof. Those that cannot be tampered with, and avoid structures that are tamper-prone. Tamper-prone, for example, are ballot papers that can be picked very easily, marked out and stuffed in the ballot boxes. For example, boxes that were those days were black outside. When somebody stuffs and it comes in, you don't see inside. So when it's when you can see inside, when it's transparent, you can see inside. That's an example of tamper-proof.
Thank you.
But if it's
while we are talking about this tamper-proof and that,
tamper-proof and tamper-prone.
Yeah. Do you know what is a blockchain technology?
Blockchain technology.
Yes.
Yeah, it's technology that has many structures and systems. For example, ERP system, the enterprise resource planning system. It can have a financial aspect on it, a social aspect on it. It can have income, output elements of it. It can have HR element on it. It can have many, many aspects on it. But what's important is that it's a unifying factor for an organization.
It keeps on creating new data on the information.
Exactly, yeah.
The data are chained together.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
All the
Dr.
best.
Abdallah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdallah. I'll now request Mr. Gideon Solonka to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Prof. Article 104 provides that the electorate under Article 97 and 98 have the right to recall the Member of Parliament representing their constituency before the end of the term of the relevant House of Parliament. Okay?
Yes.
Now, what in your view is the value of that right?
The value, thank you very much, Solonga, for that question, is a very profound, and especially in terms of non-performance. It's one way that the electorate check the performance of the member they have elected, the recall clause, that if they're not performing according to the manifesto they issued out, if they're not delivering according to the wishes of the people have a chance to recall. And there are many steps in the recall process for all offices, from president to governor, senator, MP, and even MCS, members of county assembly. And the importance of this particular clause is that the assumption is that when you assume office, the mandate is given to you, but it has a performance appraisal. The performance appraisal are the promises that you give the individuals. So if the citizens feel strongly enough that the Member of Parliament, for example, is not delivering on those particular aspects which he promised, or if there are certain elements where the Member of Parliament has failed in legal terms, for example, if he's found to be bankrupt, if he's found to contravene the Chapter 6 aspects and so on, then people have a chance to recall this particular person. But the performance contracting issue that individuals have for the MP or member of county assembly and so on are the clauses under which they can actually recall. And then the process is explained in the articles you've just cited on how the recall process works and so on until an election is held to fill the position.
Okay, maybe you can share on what grounds can a member of parliament be recalled?
Member of parliament can be recalled on many grounds. And one of the grounds on which a member of parliament can be recalled is a non-performance, as I've already pointed out. Non-performance. Non-performance in terms of articulating the interests of the people who elected him. The number two is a...
Maybe before you proceed,
yes.
where do you locate that in law? That if a member of parliament does not perform?
For example, if he fails in Chapter 6, if he's found gullible in Chapter 6, that he has been found gullible in Chapter 6, that he has contravened a public order act, or he has contravened a major constitutional issue, is in default with that constitutional issue, then he can be recalled.
Professor, you're confusing me.
Yes.
Is there a difference between non-performance and breach of Chapter 6? Or is it to you one and the same thing?
No, they are different.
Now, I want you to address the issue of non-performance and tell me which law are you looking at in that respect?
It is the Electoral Act, recall of a member of parliament or MC and so on. And the structure is in such a manner that if a member is non-performing and a voter registered to vote in that constituency where that MP comes from, for example, has a liberty to institute recall processes. But the recall process has structures to it. For example, in the documents filed for recall, there must, for example, a High Court ruling that this member of parliament has contravened on this and that. In order for that to be part of the recall process for this member, that is petitioning recall of the member of parliament.
Prof, you may need to look at Section 45 of the Elections Act. There are 3 grounds. Chapter 6, if a member of parliament is found after due process of the law to have mismanaged public resources, and if he is convicted of an offense under the Act.
Thank you so long for that.
Yes. Now, what is the role of IEBC in respect of this provision of recall, and what are some of the challenges revolving around implementation of this provision?
IEBC's role through the chair is to provide the structures for a by-election. When a recall goes through and is successful, the IEBC role is to provide an enabling environment for a by-election. And this by-election follows the structures of other by-elections in case a member has died, in case a member has been found bankrupt, and so on. All those are clauses that apply to the IEBC, to holding and preparing for an election to replace that particular member.
So who is eligible to bring such a petition or to recall?
Recall is a voter who is registered and who should have voted in that particular election for which this member was elected. He must be a registered voter, registered in the domain, in the constituency where this particular member is domiciled. So it must be a registered voter, but also one that comes from and who voted in the previous election for which this member was elected.
Thank you, Prof. And how is that petition presented and to who?
The petition, it has, as I told you, as it is written there, it has many processes. That once this is done, and for example, the High Court and all that, and the Speaker is presented with this petition, and the Speaker declares the seat vacant, the Speaker notifies the IEBC of the existence of that vacancy as a result of the success of this recall motion. Then the IEBC is put into motion to announce and declare the program or timetable for a by-election.
Okay, thank you. And are you aware also of provisions to recall members of county assembly?
Yes, members of County Assembly can also be recalled in a similar manner, I think, of a member of parliament. And it is also done by a voter who moves the petition.
Yes.
And it must be a voter who voted in the ward,
yes,
from which the MC was elected from.
Okay, thank you. What is boundary delimitation?
Boundary delimitation is a process, I think, is captured in our constitution, I think, Article 89, in terms of delimitation of boundaries, that the IEBC is entitled by the constitution to review from time to time boundaries, not before 8 years and not after 12 years. And these are done periodically, depending on the population, demographic factors, as well as other factors that delimit new constituencies from time to time. But right now, the current constitutional dispensation has limited the current constitutions at 290. But IEBC has the power to review from time to time.
Okay, thank you. What do you understand by the term biometric data, and what does that data constitute, biometric?
Thank you very much for that question. Biometric data concerns ways through which data about voters is collected. One of which is through, for example, registration of a voter, through, for example, fingerprints and so on, and then through record preparation, and then identification. So there are three aspects currently IEBC does using the biometric biodata collection.
So you've three. Which are these?
The one on voter identification, features of the voter, and so on. And the other one is the bio of the voter, especially in terms of the name and all those. And then number three is a transmission of data to one station to another, like one tallying center or one polling station to the tallying center, and so on.
Okay. Lastly, what is an electoral cycle?
Electoral cycle, it depends on the structure and the framework. But electoral cycle begins with the when elections are declared. For example, 2022, up to the time when winners are declared, and there's now monitoring and evaluation carried out, especially in terms of what went wrong, what went right, and so on, and that the processes of election is all from the beginning when elections are declared, the voter education, the voter registration processes, the electioneering processes, the campaign period. For example, right now, IEBC has put 2 months campaign period, and the elections take place on election day, and the votes are tallied, and winners are declared. And then there's a postmortem of that election, where we now come out to find out what stakeholders' views are, and so on, and then to prepare now for an eventuality of a by-election of which elections. So it ends at the monitoring and evaluation activity at the end of that particular election cycle.
Thank you, Prof, and all the best.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gideon Solonka. I'll now request Madam Elizabeth Mayo to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Professor.
Yes, madam.
It's like you have really given us a very good lecture. Yeah?
Thank you.
And now we know about tamper-prone and tamper-proof election.
Yes.
So from your talk, I have noted that you have very good exposure and training on electoral issues.
Yes.
And one of such, you are involved in training where you are to determine factors that affect elections in Africa.
Yes.
So in your view, when we now come home, Kenya,
yes,
what are the main causes of electoral violence in Kenya? Because we are tired of this. Anytime we have election, there must be violence.
Yes.
So from what you learned, what do you think are the major causes of electoral violence in Kenya?
Thank you very much for that question. Because the question is at the center of what I did mention, Chair, that in 2013, 2014, I was the lead researcher when I was at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa as director of research. We were awarded a tender by NCIC to conduct an ethnic index in Kenya. and I was able to visit as a lead researcher for 7 counties in this country when we are doing that ethnic index. And it was very sad to note, because after the 2013 elections, and we were going in 2014 to do this ethnic index, that there was a significant element of people who regard themselves as a minority as having been neglected. So the issue of exclusion is one of the causes of this violence, especially with groups who feel marginalized, who feel excluded, and who are left on the periphery of the development agenda at the county level and the national level. And then number 2, another cause for violence, and which is, I think, as alluded by the questions I was asked earlier, is the leadership incitement. And this keeps on coming up, and I'm happy you're raising this, is hate speech, for example, irresponsible talk about issues that create ethnic tensions has been one of the factors where we begin to see leaders who talk carelessly, rather carelessly, without minding that their utterances can lead to a breach of peace, can lead to incitement, and lead to violence. So leadership factor, besides the issue of ethnicity, is also important. And then the other aspect which is important is lack of party discipline. Many parties, sometimes during electioneering process, tend to hire hooligans who come from various militias or gangs and so on. And many of these parts of this country, people know the names of these vigilantes who are informal and basically illegal entities who are often hired to either protect the contestants or those vying, at the same time to oppress those they feel do not agree with their values, their ideas as to who to elect, and so on. So the issue, the presence of these vigilantes, presence of these militias, and basically youths, is also another factor. The other factor which I would like to interrogate very closely is our own cultures in terms of how we raise our children. Because some of our cultures need to promote inclusivity, that both men and women are equal. We should understand that this is the gist of the human rights discourse, that men and women are equal and they should be given equal opportunity to participate. Because the tendency is to have women at the receiving end of much of this violence. So some of the cultural ethos we are passing to the youth allows for this to happen when they begin to condone or allow gender-based violence and so on as another factor. The other area is education. The studies have been done which indicate that the higher people get educated, the less violent they become. And the less people get educated and they are unemployed, they feel hopeless and so on, the tendency to get into tempers of violence is very high. And then the other factor, cause of violence, is lack of containment of these activities in some areas. We have enough police in this Kenya, but there are arguments which are made which say that probably some areas are more policed than others. For example, Nairobi, you'll find Nairobi is more policed than some parts of this country where I've been to. For example, if it's Kalokol in Turkana or Lokitang or Merti in Isiolo, you find the movement from one police station to the police post is a long distance, and this leaves a leeway for electoral-based violence because they know even if they begin violence, the police will not arrive until very late. Then lastly is infrastructure, that some parts of the country do not have adequate infrastructure as to allow mobilization of security forces to quell violence quickly. And that can also be a factor because when they realize the police will take long to come, they begin to engage on that.
So, Professor, from what you're saying, we should expect to live with the electoral violence moving forward? No,
Mrs. Mayor, I'm not saying that.
No, just 1 minute. You have said that
yes,
we have areas where the police will not even...
Yes, but the point I'm raising is that those areas should be policed more. When we detect, and that's why we have, before elections, we have studies revealing hotspots, potential hotspots. the issue around from 1992 to the present, the issue around 20, and they can point to you where those hotspots are. So the issue is to provide intervention, for example, through early warning. What's intelligence doing to alert the potential managers of elections in terms of how to address those hotspots through early warning, that these are people who are ganging up, they're grouping up, and so on. And then secondly, provide enough adequate resources to police the area so as to detect the threat and also engage in preemptive engagement with the threat. Because when they see lorries of GSU being poured or arriving on the scene, then they tend to retreat. So there's need to eliminate the threats through identifying the hotspots through early warning and so on. And this is one of the areas I mentioned in my earlier remarks about electoral training that we did, that some people manipulate this situation to defeat the purpose of electioneering, so that those voters get displaced because they feel that they don't support them, or they get displaced through the use of violence and so on, or deter them from contesting. For example, women feel threatened when they see the violence taking place on the political scene, and they therefore get afraid to participate in the election.
Professor, you have talked of leadership incitement
Yes.
as one of the factors that contribute to electoral violence.
Yes.
Yeah, issues of hate speech.
Yes.
If you are appointed as commissioner at the commission, how will you deal with the issue of leadership incitement?
Thank you very much for that profound question, Ms. Mel, because it's actually at the core of peaceful elections. And we know that there's a NCIC is supposed to deal with this menace, but we are aware, because we live in this country, that there have been challenges in addressing these, whether they should be tackled during elections or after. It raises many controversies still in this country. But I think education can be provided, especially education to our leaders, political education, in terms of making the leaders be aware that the words they say, the pronunciations, the things they pronounce on certain issues and so on are sensitive, and they should guard their tongue and what they say. This can be done through consultative processes, through stakeholder education, and IEBC, if I'm hired, if I'm recruited, appointed as a commissioner, I'll ensure that I provide a stakeholder education, to sit down with the MCAs, with the members of parliament, with governors, with the senators, to ensure that we abide by the code of conduct. Because the current constitution as we have it now, I think the Electoral Act, schedule, 2 or 3, it has the code of conduct, that there's certain ways through which people who are seeking election or to be elected should behave in a certain manner. And the code is very clear in terms of what you say, why you say it, and so on, because it has a chance and capacity to escalate and lead to tensions and even violence. Because as we say in Africa, people listen to their leaders and they watch them. They may even, so not just talking, but also the body language, because he may not speak what he wants to say, he may not say it verbally, but if he gets into semiotics, and for example, he does that and points in that direction, it's communicating violence, violence. So there must be a way to tame this violence. And if I'm appointed as a IEBC commissioner, I'll ensure that I do stakeholder engagement to ensure that those who utter such utterances do not do them, and those who do so meet the consequences of the law, because the code of conduct describes the consequences of the law when that is found and established.
Okay, thank you, Professor. From your analysis of our electoral process, is our electoral process tamper-prone or tamper-proof, according to your analysis? Because you've just told us that...
Thank you very much, Mr. That's a very profoundly, I think, intellectual question. That is electoral system in Kenya tamper-proof or tamper-prone?
Yes.
I will say it is both.
Okay.
There are certain elements of our electoral system in Kenya that are tamper-prone, and I want to mention examples of tamper-prone processes in Kenya. One of the areas that our elections are tamper-prone is the violence in the electoral system that we do. We sometimes see violence taking place even in the polling stations. People being held their shirts and blouses in the polling stations. So that is, to me, is a precursor, is an indicator of tamper prone, because it's a precursor to the election being tampered with. Number two is the issue of poverty in this country. We have had the cases where young people give out the ID cards. So opponents buy ID cards of the areas or strongholds of their opponents. So they buy the ID cards and keep them and give them back after elections. And sometimes it's as little as 200, 300, 400, even 1,000 shillings. They give the ID card to basically disenfranchise the opponent's stronghold. That is a tamper prone.
Yes.
And then the issue of scaring away gender, especially female gender. Women don't participate in this country in elections in large numbers as compared to a country like Zambia, Ghana, and South Africa, and so on. It's because of this scarecrow, violent posture that the masculinists and the parties put in place. So to me, that's also another tamper-prone problem. Then tamper-proof, we have the IEBC as structures that are trying to make our elections tamper-proof. For example, the biometric registration, for example, the issue of having a transmission of results electronically, if it is Form 34A, Form 34B, following up to the electronically submitted results to confirm that these are provisional, but until the physical Form 34A and B arrive at tallying center, and then they are said these are now confirmed results and so on. That's an example of a tamper-proof attempt being made by IEBC.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Mayo. Allow me to request the Vice Chair to ask you a few questions.
Yeah, Prof, I'll be very brief because you've done a lot to really explain the issues behind our electoral problems. So I won't go there. Professor, if you are to be appointed, supposedly succeed, and you are appointed a commissioner of the IEBC, how would you, through the commission, help us or help the country have elections that are credible, the ones you are calling tamper-proof? What kind of thinking would you take to the commission that would add value beyond what is there, beyond what the commission is doing, beyond what has already, the policies that already exist? What kind of thinking would you take there that would bring in new, innovative ways of doing things, alternative ways of doing things, that will bring in, usher in a new era of democratic practice in our elections?
Thank you very much for that profound question, because it covers many areas. And I think Mr. Choka, and through the chair, we can do something about our elections. And if I'm appointed a commissioner at IEBC, there are certain ideas that I see that despite the fact that they're doing a good job, but this can be improved, and that's what you're actually asking. I strongly feel that compared to other countries where I've visited, we have not done enough voter education. And this is because we've not learned as a country, or an IEBC, I think, is probably in the same light, to devolve, to transfer some roles, to delegate some roles, and to outsource some roles. When I lived in America as director at Central Washington University, Central Washington University was one of the universities, of the 6 state universities in the state of Washington. We were allowed and accredited by the state electoral body to engage in voter education. So the university engaged in voter education as part of corporate social responsibility. So it was done for free by the university. So that within the locale of Ellensburg, went around in all the counties, from Cook County to other counties within the state. And where universities are located, you are located in counties within which to do voter education. This is something that I think can be done in this country, because this country has at least a university or university college in almost every county, but we don't see them being empowered to do that. If IEBC did that, if it tasked these universities as part of the corporate social responsibility to educate and to engage in voter education in the areas which they operate, it will actually ameliorate the issue that you're talking about, funding. It will ameliorate the issue of tensions of IEBC not being able to reach some areas of the country and so on. So that's one. The second aspect that I will probably want to engage stakeholders if I'm hired is the issue of issuance of IDs. Because in the case study, the issue of many youth not having identity cards and therefore being rendered incapable of getting voter card is actually critical. And there's a way in which the system can be accelerated to allow for easy issuance of ID cards and any identification materials and so on. I keep on sharing this, that I arrived in America in 1994 on a Thursday, and on Friday I had a driver's license. I arrived in Florida, Gainesville, 1994. I arrived on a Thursday, and on Friday I was taken to a driver's center. I was taken into a vehicle with an instructor. I drove around, I came back, and within 30 minutes I had a driver's license. When I share that with Kenyans, they tell me, yeah, that country must be so lucky. But it's because of when structures work. You have a passport, you have a previous license from Kenya, you are certified they can drive and so on, it's issued. So some of these things are actually structural delays and so on. So that's something I think one can work with the register of persons to make issuance of ID cards a much faster process, because many people lose out in that. And then also decentralizing issuance of IDs and just everything being done at the center and so forth. The other issue that I think is important is engaging the media. I don't think we're engaging the media enough, because we cannot succeed as a commission, as IEBC, without taking the media in every step, at every stage, and so on within the process. Some of the voter education issues can actually be done by media houses as part of their corporate social responsibility and to associate with the IEBC and so forth. The other area is youth. 60% of Kenyans are youth. Many of them would like to vote. But the problem is that they're not educated enough to know the rights of voting. So I will mobilize the IEBC, my colleagues in IEBC, and sensitize them in terms of visiting institutions. High schools have have students who are 18 years, some are 17 years, just about to turn 18, to be sensitized in terms of when they get of age to enroll, to register as voters. Universities, colleges, craft institutions and centers and so on, technical institutes, very many village barazas one can attend and educate youth, especially involving the youth in electoral, because we realize that the youth in this country are not quite as interested in elections compared to the previous generations. The other issue that I think is important and that I'll bring on board is the issue of fundraising or resource mobilization. Because resource mobilization is a challenge to organizations in this country. And there are many easy ways of raising funds. One of the easiest ways of raising funds is engaging stakeholders who are willing to participate. And I know there are many organizations out there, very many organizations out there that can be engaged in terms of supporting and funding electoral process without necessarily compromising our standards and compromising our sovereignty as a country. Each time people mention about getting funds from abroad, everybody jumps on the issue, how about the sovereignty of the country? But we get a lot of aid, but we still remain sovereign. I was paid for a scholarship by America, but I still came back to Kenya, in my country, and nobody can say that I'm a captive of American interests because they gave me a Fulbright scholarship and funded my education for 3 years at the University of Illinois. So the issue is that negotiating to understand the give and take. There's always give and take in terms of resource mobilization. And then finally, it's high time that IEBC thought about creating its own location, headquarters that it owns, so as to stop paying rent, and also have its own television. have its own TV and radio. Establishing a TV and radio is a very, very small thing. It's a very small thing to an organization such as IEBC. Every electoral body that I have monitored in the world have their own TV and radio station. What do? They counter manipulation. IEBC can establish a radio and a TV station that it becomes official issuance of electoral results. That the election results will come out of this, like C-SPAN in America, for example, the public TV in the US, for example, and a radio that broadcasts electoral results so that you avoid this manipulation. Social media comes up and says that actually we are declaring so-and-so winner, or CNN saying we are projecting this to be a winner, then they are told, no, wait for the official declaration from the IEBC TV, which will declare that. So that these early projections, based sometimes on false exit voting, because exit votes are illegal in this country, but in other countries, exit votes are allowed. When a voter is asked at the outside the door after voting, whom do you vote for? Then they compile data, then they begin to project a winner. So that's something I think I'll bring on board, trying to inculcate a sense that you can have their own media, an active radio and TV station to counter any manipulation of results as they get out, as they get streamed out and so on.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, this is a position of leadership.
Yes.
And you have held many positions of leadership up to this point.
Yes.
Have you been in situations where your leadership qualities, capabilities have been challenged to the point of almost giving up?
Thank you, Mr. Choka, for that question. Through the chair, as a leader, situations arise from time to time, some more challenging than others. And I've been in university management for some time, Mr. Choka. And one of the areas that we encounter problems is rebellion by youth. Youth are by nature rebellious. And S.K. Skinner says that there's no youth he met who didn't show elements of trance or delinquency. So the societal structures correct them constantly. And I've heard those before, but what's important is how you face it and the solutions provided for that. I've had cases where students plan to go on strike. In all the universities I've worked, apart from when I worked in America, I've had situations where lecturers go on strike because of demanding certain issues according to the CBA and WASU and so on. I met these when I was at Kisi as DVC, Lukenya as Vice Chancellor and so on. But what's important is making the other party be aware that you are with them, that you understand where they're coming from, and that you can reach an amicable solution through dialogue. What's important is to make the other party be aware. If you are a commissioner and you're dealing with secretariat issues, be aware that you provide a fair policy framework so that when a benefit is dispensed, that all members of the organization feel that yes, this person deserved that chance to go training sponsored by IEBC. When you make a decision, whether it's a collective decision on a tendering or procurement issue and so on, is to make all the stakeholders be aware that this process was tamper-proof. It was done in a very open manner, that there's no question to that. So the issue of challenges always emerge when you're a leader. But what's important is how you deal with those situations that satisfy the resolution of everybody. 80% of elections in Africa are disputed. 2021 figures from UNDP, 80% of elections in Africa are disputed. Compared to other countries, for example, European countries and elsewhere. Why is that the case? This has improved from 92-3% in the 90s. In the 90s, I think almost 90% of elections were disputed. Now we are getting to 80. So this can be improved through assurance of participants, through change of perception, through dialogue, through engagement, and so on. So there are many times that has come up, and as if I'm appointed as a commissioner at IEBC, I'll bring my leadership skills, my negotiation skills, my mediation skills, my dialogues to ensure that we do things amicably and promote teamwork and team building as part of the synergies for the organization.
Thank you, Prof. I hope one day we shall have a national think tank that you can serve in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I welcome the idea of a think tank.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. I will now request Reverend Father Mutie to ask you a few questions.
Thank you, Chair. Professor, habari ya adhuhuri ama ni jioni?
Mzuri sana Reverend Mutie.
Asante. I'll do some like 2 follow-up questions. One is that you said that you had your colleagues whom you studied with in the US. One is a commissioner in South Africa. Another one has been working with the Electoral Commission in, is it Ghana?
Yes.
Now, what unique thing have they shared with you which would encourage you to seek an appointment with the Electoral Commission of Kenya?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Reverend Mutie. One of the challenges that I think we get, and in responding to that, Chair, is that we don't do a lot of benchmarking in Africa. But South Africa, if you open the website right now, you'll find that a voter in any part of the world can establish the voter registration status. There's a link where you only put your ID and it will tell you which station, which voting, which polling station you belong to, which area, and so on. It's instantaneous. You don't have to go to a constituency office to establish that physically, but you can do that online. And then South Africa's electoral system are stabilized, and I think this is where Kenya can learn from that because of the political maturity in terms of political parties. It's only in Kenya where each election we bring out a new political party. South Africa has had the ANC and the Inkatha Freedom Party as the main 2 parties, and the National Party, the NP, those 3 parties, since 1994. They remain dominant actors. Ghana has a similar structure. Since the NDC and the Patriotic Party of Ghana was established, the 2 parties have exchanged leadership from one leader to the other. So the stability of political parties is very, very important. And Kenya, I think we need to cultivate positive synergies in our political parties to have endurance, not to revolve around leaders, but to have structures that get entrenched. And why this is a problem in Kenya is that the party funding, we need to revisit the whole question of party funding. We need to revisit the whole structuring of party funding to make party hopping, because people often hop from one party to the other within every election cycle. And you discover that when many parties are doing nominations in Kenya, whether it's Jubilee or ODM and so on, the candidates have fallback plans. They register in other parties and they get certificates. So they have one certificate in this pocket that in case they miss this one, then they produce this one. If they get the one for ODM, then they pull it out, say I have this one or Jubilee. But in case they miss this, they pull out one from another political party, and that creates a sense of instability. So that we need to begin to reinforce the education on creating a stable political situation to allow political parties to be stable. I've learned from Ghana's structure in terms of perception. The perception of the Ghana Electoral Commission is very high right now. If you look at the current, I think 2-3 weeks ago, they were ranked, I think the percentage was 58 or 56. That's very rare for an electoral body. South Africa's ranks even higher. So this tells us that if you create perception through education, through engagement with the people, and they do voter education continuously. And Ghana, for example, uses all stakeholders for voter education. And then South Africa's difference with Kenya is that the accreditation of observers, who are very important in Kenya, in the constitution is done by IEBC. Observers are supposed to be fact checkers. They're supposed to be our examiners. If you're a commission of IEBC, the observer is seeing how you're doing your work. A monitor is observing how you're doing your work. So you should not appoint your own examiner. Because in the university, if a student had to appoint their own examiner, they'll probably appoint their father or their mother or their brother or their sister. So there must be a way through which the monitoring and observation of elections in Kenya is different, that the accreditation process is done by somebody else in order to have fairness in terms of the thoroughness of the monitoring and evaluation exercise and activity. So there are certain things that I've drawn from the 2 countries, and I realize that in the current rating in Africa, the 2 commissions rank very highly, They rank actually the highest, followed by Zambia before 2016. Before 2016, Zambia was also in that bracket, but the ranking has gone down for Zambia. But Malawi has gone up in terms of ranking of the performance of the electoral body.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Professor. It's true that you are a scholar I admire. You've done 57 publications. You have also done 24 journals. You teach, you're a tutor for over 70 units. That's really, really amazing. Sir, you said that there are areas that...
Say that again, sir.
You earlier alluded to the fact that at some point we have inadequate security in our polling stations.
Yes.
And you felt that, there should be more police.
Yes.
In our polling stations.
Yes.
Do you feel that this is the way to go? Don't you see that, the more we engage our police officers in these processes, the more we destroy their image, because we've had, a history that over 50% of GBV
right.
is commuted by our security agents.
Right.
Don't you feel that this is a time we needed to think outside the box, and
yes,
what would be your thinking?
I get the point, and I think I will provide technology as a solution, because policing comes because of fear of tampering, that some hoodlums, some gangs or some individuals can storm a polling station and disrupt the process. So the policing is predicated on that idea, on that thing and that notion that they can actually tamper. But if you have a system which gangs are made aware of, and those who are interested in tampering, that there's a dual system of voting, that besides the ballot, the physical ballot, there's a backup system where there's electronic ballot. And IEBC is actually empowered to establish another electronic balloting. So there's a paper balloting, like in many counties in the US, and then there's electronic balloting, that this vote counts and this vote counts. Then at the end of the day, you examine a comparative analysis of the tally. If the paper ballots are 80, the electronic ballot should also be 80 for that polling station. So that if people are educated, that even if you tamper with the physical ballot in the polling station, the electronic ballot, you can't tamper with it because it is in the sky, it is in the cloud, it is secure somewhere we have no access to. So I think the transformation and the changing of the form of voting that we do can actually transform that thinking. But the thinking is that if you have a system the way we do that is almost 80% manual, then the ballot paper really counts. But if the electronic paper, then you won't even need the 2 policemen will be enough, because if they disrupt and the activities has ended, then I think that will take over. And then the other structures that we have not had in Kenya, for example, early voting, we don't have that in our structure, because there are fears that if we encourage early voting in this country, that will be chaotic and so on. The other means of voting through the post, people will tell you maybe it's not as efficient as other countries, the postal system. They'll tell you that people don't have telephones if you want to do electronic voting and so on at home, not necessarily in the polling. So there are many mechanisms of beating that security. But I agree with you, Reverend Mutie, that we don't need a lot of security in polling stations, because it may serve as part of the intimidation of the voter in terms of participating. So I think, let me just explain myself that I'm not saying that you 100% advocate for increase of police, but can you have a management system where the potential tamperers, those who want to tamper, find that their tampering is mute? It can not go anywhere because of the structures you put in place.
Thank you, Professor. You are a professor of history.
Yes, sir.
And history says that we never learn sometimes. We never learn from history itself. you just alluded to the fact that the current research says that 80% of Africa elections are disputed.
Yes.
In a nutshell,
Yes.
what can be done to sanitize this history?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Reverend. There are many mechanisms and structures that can put in place to reduce election tampering and make our elections tamper-proof. One of the mechanisms of making our elections tamper-proof is voter education, that when you lose an election, you are declared that you didn't get enough votes to win and somebody else is declared winner. The point of magnanimity and concession lacks in many of our countries because of the culture that we've gone through. But these cultures need to be inculcated among our youth through peace clubs in schools, through NCIC activities and so on, that conceding defeat is not a defeat as such. In fact, there are people who actually are victorious in their loss. In the defeat, they actually are more victorious because the way they present themselves, they remain very afloat in terms of dignity and so forth. So we need to inculcate a sense of conceding when you have lost than engaging in violent vitriol and so forth. The number two is to make our election structures persuasive, secure, fair, and changing the perception to make appreciation of the electoral system valuable. We have seen in Ghana presidential losers conceding when there were lost elections, like I think Mahama did to Mills, Atta Mills, and so on, that you can stand there and say that, like President Uhuru Kenyatta did in 2002, actually to Mwai Kibaki, that you can stand there and say that now bring all my supporters, I concede that I lost this election, and I wish the winner all the best, and we'll work together to build our nation. There's more in unity than in division, and that we are one, we are Kenyans. A simple speech like that actually will go a long way in taking away that history of dispute of elections. The number three is that if election is done fairly and they see the results are visible, they see the graph in the electronic transmission that is fair, that is not manipulated, people begin to understand that this thing is fair and so on, and they can begin to appreciate that. But when they have a history of manipulation in the past, so there's a need to make Kenyans unlearn the past, to unlearn the mistrust from Mlolongo that the learned friend here, the learned colleague here, I'm not learned so I can't call him learned, but as a learned person here, pointed out that if we cannot convince Kenyans that now the election is free and fair, there'll still be disputes. But countries where the people have learned that the election is free and fair, and they participate and they see the results are declared, nobody will contest. So there's a need to unlearn the past, to unlearn the 1997, to unlearn the 2007, especially the 2007 scenarios. We unlearn those and eradicate them from our memories. And that can only be done through new knowledge about fair elections and how they can be conducted.
Thank you so very much, Professor. Allow me to ask you, have you ever been perceived, has your integrity ever been questioned?
No, sir. My integrity has never been questioned in all the organizations I've worked in, and even as a student in the university and as a worker in Kenya and America, my integrity has never been in question. But I faced integrity challenges which I've handled to the best of the law and how I felt best. Because as a leader, there are all those tempting forces that will come to you, with money to sell a certificate to them, with money to inflate a grade, or to make them pass when they have failed. So all those things have been exposed to me, but I've always resisted that and always followed the law as laid out by the organizations I've worked for. Thank you, Reverend, for that.
Professor, allow me to take you to some years back. You were the DVC.
Yes.
In 2013 to 2016 at Kisii University.
Yes, sir.
It is in the public domain.
Yes.
That some students graduated without, acquiring the proper academic qualifications. What do you say about that?
It's not entirely true, because what happened was that we received applications from various students to the university, and these applications were processed from the department. Departments receive admission materials, and the departments admitted them through the dean of various faculties, and the deans forwarded this to Senate, and we discussed these admissions in Senate, and the admissions were approved by Senate, and the candidates were admitted to the university. However, along the line, we discovered that they are not tendered the actual papers of release from those other universities which we conducted, and this came to bear. When this came on the surface, we went back to Senate and deregistered them so they could begin afresh. They had transferred units. They had transferred units from the universities where they were, but I think 3 or 4 were found out that actually the university didn't release them, and the Senate passed, and they went back to do the coursework. So that was through the system. It was not Professor Mrabi did that, but it was through the system, and Senate is chaired by the Vice Chancellor and not the Deputy Vice Chancellor. So that came through. That came through, and it was discovered that they were admitted erroneously, and the Senate went back on its own rule, and they declared them to begin coursework afresh. So there was no integrity threat there, because we resolved the issue amicably, and the students were able to go back to class from first year.
Thank you for that clarification, Professor. When you tendered your certificates, we requested that among your certificates we needed the KRA certificate. The KRA certificate.
Yes.
And what you sent us was the 2020, it's dated 29th September 2020. What is your current status?
No, I have the current one. Actually, if you look at the folder, the current one is there, 2021. The current is there. Okay. The current status is that I'm in good standing.
What about the DCI clearance?
The
DCI clearance.
Could you repeat that?
What about the DCI clearance certificate?
Yes, I have that as well. The police clearance is there and it's current. It's current as well.
The application that the one you gave us is an application for November 2020.
I think I should have the current one, unless if I didn't download from the system, but I have the current, the police clearance. They are all current. I have police clearance, I have ESCC, I have all those that are current. Okay. And I think they go for 1 year. The clearance go for 1 year.
Okay.
They go for 12 months. So if it's 2020, you will see that it's November, it will end in November. So just check the dates. If it's 2020 July, it's supposed to go to July this year. So they are actually all current.
Okay, thank you so very much, Professor. I want to wish you all the best. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Reverend Mutie. Professor,
yes,
before we finish, I think I needed to mention that when we wrote to IEBC,
yes,
requesting them to confirm if you are a registered voter, they indicated that they didn't have you on their records.
Yes, and of their card here, issued to me after my biometric registration. So I don't know, they're allowed to say that. These are some of the things I think that if I'm hired, I'll help in addressing, because it's very easy to address that. You can have a call with because I have the card here, which I used to register and vote.
Yeah, and maybe just for you to confirm,
yes,
what form of identification did you use when you are registering to vote?
Yes, I think that has come up,
okay,
whether I used a passport or I used an ID. Maybe I need to sort that out. because I had both ID and passport at that time, so I don't know which one I might have used there. So that could be the issue of contention.
On your card, is the name MOU or MAU?
Yeah, that could be a factor, but I have the card here. I could confirm that, yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is this MAU. So this could be actually passport. That could be a problem. This MAU is what's on my passport, and MOU is on the ID. So it could be a passport. So they need to check out the passport number. Yeah, that's true, because it's actually MAU.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
For that confirmation.
Yes.
I now have a general knowledge question for you.
Yes, Chair.
Can you tell us who were the first two vice presidents of the Republic of Kenya?
Oh, thank you, Chair, for that question. The first vice president of the Republic of Kenya was Jaramogi Adonija Oginga Odinga, and the second president was Joseph Murumbi.
Thank you so much, Prof. And with that, we come to the end of your oral interview. I invite you to make any remarks you may have for the panel.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity. I want to take this chance to thank the panelists. I felt very privileged when my own location in Vihiga celebrated my being shortlisted to come before you, because it's a location which has never had a commissioner or ambassador or high-ranking person. I was the first person from that area. So as we talk about Vihiga, you should also talk about marginalization within Vihiga, because I come from Bunyore, and in Vihiga we have people from Bunyore, Maragoli, and Tiriki. So talk about marginalization within certain areas. So I want to thank you very much for that privilege, for making the area chief call me and telling me that you have seen your name in the paper. I want to thank you also because this is the first time that I've applied to a commission job and got my name in the list of applicants. Most of the time, you don't even get to the application list of those who have applied. So to be among the applicants and then shortlisted, I want to thank the Commission for Transparency and Accountability. I enjoyed the process, the psychometric tests that we did. It was very professionally done. I've done over 10 psychometric tests in the US when I was applying for various positions. So when I found it's here now, I thought this is very, very good for HR, because it gauges out of things about perception, about understanding of issues and contemporaneous of our selection process. I've enjoyed your questions, very, very profound, important questions that have illuminated even my own thinking about what areas that IEBC needs to look at. Whether I'm selected or not, I want to thank you for appearing before you. I find this a great honor, because it's not one given to many. I've not served in high-profile positions like my other people on the list. I saw the ambassadors there, the former commissioners there. So I feel that it was a privilege even to get me to sit here to answer these questions. In the national anthem, the first stanza talks about justice be a shield and defender, that we serve under mighty God, whether it's God, Allah, and so on, and that is what propels us. And I'm happy that in your own thinking, your own wisdom, you thought it fit that I should come and answer these questions. IEBC is a body. IEBC belongs to all of us, and whoever is declared a winner in this process, therefore, I wish them the best of luck, because they're presenting the best, the creme de la creme in this country. We need to move forward and end the election violence. We need to move forward and be repeatable the way we were before 2007. So I want to thank you, all of you, for the opportunity awarded to me, and I shall ever be grateful for the honor and the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. And allow me to correct you. You have held high office. I think becoming a vice-chancellor of a university in this country is no mean feat.
Thank you.
Yes, so you are a leader. I also just want to take this opportunity on behalf of the panel and the people of Kenya and the people of Vihiga
Yes.
to thank you,
Thank you.
for applying to serve in this very important position of member of IEBC. We don't take that for granted when we see Kenyans who want to perform national duty. So we appreciate that, and we want to wish you well. I will ask a member of the Secretariat to escort you.
Thank you.
Make sure you back your original documents, and we wish you a very good weekend, and God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chair, if you allow me, maybe
Yes, sir.
through the powers of your office and borrowing the words of Professor Amutabi, could you please issue a profound proclamation that the weekend has started?
On that
I like
note,
that.
yes, we are going to take a break until Monday morning at 9:30.
All right.
And since I've made that announcement, no, we still have to put in some work more before we can go for the weekend ourselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
may-
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you.